Thank you everyone for joining us this evening for Module 1 preview with Dr. Gary Huber. Module 1, a metabolic approach to endocrinology, is part of the Fellowship in Metabolic and Nutritional Medicine through the Metabolic Medical Institute. I'm so excited to introduce Dr. Huber. Dr. Huber has spent 20 years as an emergency medicine physician before evolving his practice into integrative medicine care. Dr. Huber is an adjunct faculty teaching integrative medicine practice at the University of Cincinnati College of Pharmacy, as well as a clinical preceptor for the pharmacy students. Dr. Huber also lectures on hormone replacement therapies, cardiovascular care, sports medicine, and other integrative topics for the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine. He has developed the Huber Personalized Weight Loss Program that has proven very successful in promoting healthy weight loss as well as reversing metabolic syndrome issues. Dr. Huber has a long-held interest in nutrition and human physiology as it relates to wellness and longevity. Due to the very high attendance this evening, please use your chat option should you have a question. Dr. Huber, thank you so much. I'm going to turn the webinar over to you.
Thank you very much, and good evening to everyone. I know it's tough, long, hard day. I know I had a long, hard day. My EMR crashed twice. Have you had that day? That's fun. Patient staring at you and you have a dead screen. Anyway, that was my problem. Thanks for coming out tonight. I know it's difficult, so sit back. We'll hopefully have a little fun. I got some questions and answers for you, and happy to take any questions you have. We're going to talk about some of the activities that are going to happen in Module 1, and if you're very new to A4M, if you've never attended a module, if this is your first module, great place to start. We're going to go through a little bit of what you'll see there. If you've already attended the module or you've attended other modules, I still got a few things sprinkled in here, so plenty of provocative things to view. I put this up. This is the basic pattern of estrogen and progesterone over a woman's life, because I find it's remarkable how many of us really don't understand what's going on over the course of a lifetime. And we're going to get into the physiology of estrogen and progesterone. So I keep this on my laptop. I share it with patients on a regular basis. And let me just walk you through. So here's the teen years. Here's menarche. We're just starting. And yes, they're very erratic, right? That's when we're going to talk about migraines during Module 1. The two areas in a woman's life when she's most likely to have a migraine are right there when she is a teen, and then it becomes very stable, and then they recur as they get near menopause. In fact, about half of women at time of menopause experience migraine headaches. We only have one, but almost half of women will have at least one migraine headache because of the hormone flux, and we'll get into that during Module 1. But here's the steady years, your 20s and your 30s. The dotted line there is progesterone. The top line is estrogen, and right around here is age 35. And what do we see happening? Estrogen's trending down, and progesterone's trending down, but twice as fast as estrogen. And that's the problem, the disparity. Both hormones are dropping, but progesterone's dropping at twice the pace. And so oftentimes, when do we see women complaining of onset of PMS or breast tenderness or headaches and these kinds of symptoms around their cycles? It's when they're in perimenopause, because progesterone's dropping. Then this line represents the lovely age of 50, and estrogen isn't gone. We're still making some. We're making a lot of it from DHA of the adrenal glands, but we see this spiking pattern of rises in estrogen that cause vasoactive symptoms or flashes and sweats. And I tell women, we don't need to replace the estrogen back to what it was when you were in your 20s and 30s. If we get it up to maybe 30%, it's enough to decrease the rise and fall of that estrogen. It's not as dramatic, and it's enough to control symptoms. And when we bring the progesterone up, we help stabilize the estrogen receptors, and the whole system becomes better, healthier. So I show that because I think it's a very important tool as we look at where are we in the spectrum as we see our patients come in. And I have a trivial pursuit question here for you. So here's the question of the evening. What was the largest hormone study ever done? Yes, I know what you're all thinking, and if all of you said the Women's Health Initiative, you're in the majority, but you're wrong. Next question, how many women were given hormones in the Women's Health Initiative? 160,000, 82,000, 13,800, or none? Well, the answer is actually none. No women in the Women's Health Initiative got hormone therapy. Every single one of them got drug therapy. The Women's Health Initiative included 160,000 in total enrollment, but there were many arms of that study. There was cardiovascular arms and bone density, calcium study. Only 13,816 received any quote-unquote hormonal drug therapy, and it was Premarin and Provera or Prempro. So that's a very different picture than what a lot of us hear in the rhetoric talking about the Women's Health Initiative. And it sent to our collective understanding of hormones a very bad message. What most women heard was hormones are bad and they cause cancer. That wasn't even close to what the Women's Health Initiative showed. It showed that when synthetic drug therapies were used, you had an increase in cancer, but we could make no determination about hormones. In the study, those that received Premarin only, there was an arm of the Women's Health Initiative that only received Premarin, they actually had a reduction in the occurrence of breast cancer. In the women that received Provera, whether they got it in conjunction with Premarin or by itself, they showed an increased risk, and in general, the number that's typically quoted is 26% increased risk in the occurrence of breast cancer. So that's different than the picture we often are told. Further trivial pursuit here, what is the primary active estrogen hormone in the female body? It's 17-beta estradiol. And how much 17-beta estradiol is in Premarin? Well, the answer is there are 10 different estrogens in Premarin, but 17-beta estradiol makes up less than 1%. In fact, 50% of all the estrogen in Premarin is estrone, which is a storage form, an adverse form of estrogen we wouldn't voluntarily take or want to take. The other 7 of the estrogens in that product are not even human-based. They're horse-based, and their affinity to the estrogen receptor varies, and we can talk about that at Module 1. So the real study, the largest study ever done of hormones on women was the E3N study. It occurred about the same time as the Women's Health Initiative. It followed 54,500 women, and 29,000 of those received hormone therapies that included bioidentical, and there was some use of progestins in that study. But this was the largest study ever done using bioidentical hormones on women. It was much bigger than the Women's Health Initiative, which only had, as I said, about 13,000. And this study showed no increased risk of breast cancer with the use of bioidentical hormones. There was an increased risk only when progestin. Once again, we're back to the drug therapy. And if you've never read this study, it's free online access, and I'll put the listing for you there. It's a study you should know and be familiar with. So what's the big difference between the Women's Health Initiative and the E3N study? Well, progesterone is the molecule on the top right, and progestin, or medroxyprogesterone acetate, is progestin on the bottom, and the black groups represent the difference between those two molecules. The drug company Wyeth attached these chemical compounds, and in fact, back in the year 2000, they were making $2 billion a year selling progestins, or their Provera, and it looks similar to progestin in some ways, but it's very, very different compound. If we just compare it at face value, because it's alarming, isn't it, that the FDA lists Premarin and progesterone in the same drug class, when one is a hormone made by the body and one's a synthetic compound with very different activities. Progesterone is protective of breast tissue, and it can actually reverse fibrocystic breast disease and reduce the risk or occurrence of breast cancer. Progestin, on the other hand, we've seen increases the risk of breast cancer. If you're a pregnant female, in the 3rd trimester of your pregnancy, you're making upwards of 400 milligrams of progesterone a day, and you're healthy and the fetus is healthy. Progestin, on the other hand, causes birth defects. Quite the different impact. Progesterone has a very calming influence. It has an influence on the GABA receptors in the brain, so it facilitates sleep and is a mood stabilizer, where progestin we see increases the risk of depression and anxiety and sleeplessness. A lot of the mechanism for that is through its ability to influence nutrients in your body. So birth control pills that contain progestins are one of the worst drugs on the planet for driving drug-induced nutrient depletions. It depletes all of the B vitamins. It'll deplete tyrosine, the precursor to neurotransmitters, also depletes many minerals including zinc, selenium. So that's part of its mechanism. But once again, we're talking night and day difference between progesterone and progestin. The cardiovascular benefits of progesterone, it actually lowers blood pressure, is cardioprotective, where progestins, we know, increase the risk of heart attacks and stroke. And then progesterone is a natural diuretic, where progestin causes fluid retention. So we couldn't have two more diametrically opposed compounds, and yet they're often spoken of in the same breath. So while we're dismissing myths, let's talk about soy briefly. So soy isoflavones are weak phytoestrogens. I've seen ridiculous things posted online. Of course, that's where you post ridiculous things. But phytoestrogens, I've seen ridiculous articles saying if you feed your children soy, you might as well just give them a birth control pill. That's a ridiculous statement. Genistein, diazine are compounds in soy. The interesting thing, and I list one citing here in the journal Carcinogenesis in 2005, when they use isolated soy genistein, it could stimulate breast cancer tumor growth. But they could not do that using whole food soy. It did not stimulate growth. In fact, I have have students in my office on a daily basis, and I've lectured at UC to the pharmacy students, and I said, I'll give anyone in this room an A right now if they can bring me a paper showing me that the ingestion of whole food organic soy had any adverse effect on hormonal cancers. And nobody's produced one. I don't know of any. If you know of one, send it to me. I would love to be enlightened. The key here is that soy needs to be in its whole form, and it needs to be organic, because most of the soy in this country is not organic, it's genetically modified. But we know that cultures that eat soy have much lower rates of breast cancer. There's a lot of phytonutrients within soy that are beneficial and anti-inflammatory. And we have to remember that these compounds, these phytoestrogens, they're like estrogen receptor blockers. They do engage the estrogen receptor, but at 1/1000th of the signal that estrogen has. So in a sense, they're occupying the receptor and down-regulating the impact that estrogen can have. They also have some impact on the HP axis. Saw this article and I thought, oh, finally, I found an article that says eating soy is dangerous. This is terrible. Here's a title: Dietary genistein negates the inhibitory effect of letrozole on the growth of aromatase-expressing estrogen-dependent human breast cancer cells. I thought, oh no, my theory is shot. I start reading the article, and as I get down to the materials and methods, what do I find? They say dietary genistein, but did they use that in the study? No. They used genistein that was purchased from the Idofine Chemical Company of Somerville, New Jersey. So once again, a fractionated soy product, not whole food. So more myth. Does estrogen cause breast cancer? That's what many doctors and patients would have us believe. Yet I took this right off the American Cancer Society's website under estrogen therapy and cancer risk. And I simply cut and pasted it from that site. It says estrogen therapy is not linked to a higher risk of breast cancer. In fact, certain groups of women taking estrogen therapy, such as women who had no family history of breast cancer and those who had no history of benign breast disease, had a slightly lower risk of breast cancer. I find this puts my patients at ease. They begin to see that big institutions like the American Cancer Society are beginning to throw the old myths into the garbage. So this very busy slide is critical to every clinician's understanding, or slides like this, of how estrogen works in the body. So we see at the very top that progesterone is moving estrogen over to its storage form of estrone sulfate. So here's estradiol. Here is the most active estrogen in the body, converting into estrone. a less active, weaker estrogen, and then an estrone sulfate where it's stored. Now this is interesting because in obese menopausal patients, and we know that the rates of obesity and overweight are very high in this country, we have the ability in those fat cells with the inflammatory impact on the fat cells in the breast to take this stored estrone sulfate and activate it into estrone and aromatize, because we make more aromatase in heavier or fat-laden breast tissue to convert estrogen or testosterone into estrogen, but also cancer tumor cells possess the very enzymes needed, sulfatase and 17-HSD type 1 enzyme, to convert this all the way to estradiol. So what's happening within the breast tissue, we'll talk more about that later, but this is our basic dynamic with estrogen. So stored estrogen gets turned back into estrone. Estrone, the catechol estrogen, is going to go down one of three pathways: 2-hydroxy, 4-hydroxy, or the 6-hydroxy pathway. And this is where the 2:16 ratio back in the 1980s became popular, and looking at how women were metabolizing their estrogen, we wanted to go down the 2-hydroxy pathway. We wanted to go over here to 2-hydroxy. Now, diindolylmethane, and you could write iodine right there, promote the CYP1B1 pathway that takes catechol estrogens down the 2-hydroxy pathway. That's what we want. This is beneficial. 2-hydroxy estrogen is a weak estrogen, and as soon as we methylate it with COMT, it's inactive. So it's not a problem. If it gets oxidized, then it can become a problem. But if it's going this way with the help of diindolylmethane and iodine, then this is the direction we want it to go. If we see catechol go down the 4-hydroxy pathway, this is the troublemaker. Toxins of any kind, dioxins, PCBs, pesticides, herbicides, any kind of a toxin will activate this CYP1B1 enzyme and generate catechols into 4-hydroxy estrogen. This isn't a problem yet, but as it gets oxidized and becomes a quinone estrogen, this is how we initiate breast cancer. The 4-hydroxy can still be bound up by catechol-methyltransferase, and it can be bound up by glutathione. Either one of those would inactivate it. But if it gets past those, we're overproducing this quantity. It can get oxidized. One of the leading causes for oxidizing the 4-hydroxy estrogens are lipid peroxides, so oxidized fats, French fries, chips, bad fats in the diet will promote this handsomely and turn it into a quinone estrogen. And now we have trouble because a quinone estrogen can bind the DNA, and that's what causes purine adducts. 2-hydroxy estrogen, if it gets oxidized, can it bind the DNA? It can. It can cause some damage, but that damage is reparable. It can be fixed. 4-hydroxy binding the DNA creates irreparable damage that now we have altered DNA, and potentially we have cancer. There are numerous ways to block, reverse, and alter this pathway, and we're going to go into that in much greater detail in Module 1. Put some simple tools in your hand about how to modulate this. Now, I'm going to point to the 16 because you may hear about the 2:16 ratio, but the 16 is not a threat. The 16-hydroxy estrogens are weak estrogens. They're 20 times weaker than estradiol. So truly, when we talk about the 2 to 16, the 16 is just a constant. It's not an important variable. It's really just telling us, is our 2-hydroxy high or low? Because if it's low, then it probably tells us that catechols are going down the 4-hydroxy pathway. So the real ratio that we should be focusing on is the 2 to 4 ratio, and I'll show you a urine metabolite screen that really highlights that. So you may hear of the 2:16. It is a marker of some value, but it's minimal when there's so many other better markers available through urine metabolite testing. So then we have COMT and glutathione. These are important. Now think about it for just a second. If you're taking in lots of toxins, are you going to occupy COMT and glutathione? Yes. So the more toxic your diet, the more toxic your lifestyle, you're going to occupy these detoxifying chemicals, limiting their availability to take out the quinones, okay? So it's an important concept to keep in mind. And just as a reminder, progestins push toward estradiol and cancer risk. So progestins go this way, whereas progesterones push estradiol into a storage form, all right? So hate to belabor that slide, but it's very important. There's a lot of good content there. So the 216, more myth. The 216 estrogen ratio is the best predictor of breast cancer risk. No, maybe back in the 80s it was a good tool at that time, but we have much better tools at this point. There's an article here on the Townsend letter. I gave you the listing. It's free to the public, and it'll give you some breakdown on some of the bigger studies that have been done on 216, showing that it's not as consistent as we'd like it to be. It had its day, but its day has kind of passed. Relative strength of estrogens. Estradiol is the most powerful. Followed, we have estriol, a very weak estrogen. In fact, this is considered an anti-cancer estrogen. Estriol has no ability to convert into estradiol or estrone. So a very safe but very weak estriol. We don't see this much in women when either pre or postmenopausal. We only see it when women are pregnant, and it has a huge impact on the immune system. You may notice that your patients that have immune issues or autoimmune disease or psoriasis, food allergies, seasonal allergies, that when they get pregnant, those symptoms go away. Estriol is used in multiple sclerosis patients because of that impact. It has a nice impact on the immune system and is used in the autoimmune disease of multiple sclerosis. But as an estrogen, it's very healthy, very protective, and that's why we use it in biased. Then we have the 16-hydroxy, which we've already pointed out is 20 times less active than estradiol. Soy, 1,000 times less active. And then a very curious passenger in this train, BPA. Now, BPA is 10,000 times less active, but some people have 10,000 times more BPA than they do estrogen. So it's a very significant intruder in our general endocrine function, and it's a lousy toxin. So we stay away from plastics and stay away from that in general. So urine metabolites offer a stronger option for us, and we'll go into those in more detail during the module. But what are you doing to your estrogen? Are you oxidizing it into a quinone? Which pathway are you activating, the 2 or the 4? We'll talk about ways to steer it toward the 2 versus the 4. And are you able to methylate it? Is your COMT working? Do you have a methylation defect? So the 2-4 ratio and the methyl to hydroxy ratio offer clear guidance and actionable information for change. I want to give you just a brief case history. Very interesting case because it really hits a lot of marks for us. So Jessica was very young, 34, breast cancer diagnosed in 2013. She had mastectomy, no radiation or chemo. Now at 34, you're saying, why does she have cancer? She must have the BRCA gene. She didn't. She didn't have the BRCA gene, as most breast cancer patients don't have the BRCA gene. She was moody around her cycles. What is that telling us? It's telling us there's some estrogen dominance in play, right? The likelihood is high that her progesterone production was not good, and we know that estrogen dominance does contribute to the potential for breast cancer. She had lead, wasn't terribly high, 6.8, but that alters our immune system. And if our immune cells and our killer cells can find cancer cells and remove them, we're at less risk. The more hampered our immune system is by either autoimmune disease or by lead or heavy metals or toxicity in general, then the less well they're going to work. We know that lead and mercury have a strong link to breast cancer risk. Then we see inflammatory colon. She had a positive scope, was on sulfasalazine. That's just a marker of inflammation. Her gut is inflamed. That's the heart and soul of our immune system. No significant food allergies, but she did have this migratory joint pain with edema, again, showing an inflammatory biochemistry. And we know that inflammation breeds cancer. So there we have it. And I met Jessica after she had her mastectomy. And she came because she was nervous and didn't want to have recurrence. And so I'm showing you a urine screen that's done by ZRT, and I want to point out those urine metabolites that are so valuable. Now, I had the opportunity to do it twice. I did it in May, and then I did it, I think this is 5 or 6 months later. the date isn't there, it's out of the picture. So let's run down this briefly. These are the parent estrogens, estradiol, estrone, estriol, and they were normal, okay, but estradiol was 1.7. We got it reduced to 1.1. We know that heavy amounts of estrogen are going to increase, an estrogen burden in general can increase your breast cancer risk. But that's not the most significant thing on this test. I'm going to zero on the most significant thing, 4-hydroxyestrogens. When you see these, that is the smell of cancer, and hers are high. We see 2-hydroxyestrogens were also high. And then we look at methylation down here. I'll look at the 4-methylestrone to 4-hydroxyestrone, and we see that it was low. And the 4-methylestradiol to 4-hydroxyestradiol was low. We want these high. We want these women methylating, right? So the fact that she's not methylating, the fact that this ratio is low and her 4-hydroxyestrogens are high, that's what a cancer patient looks like. Let's look at the 2:16 ratio. As the adage goes, if the 2:16 is high, that's low risk. Well, it was very high, and yet she had breast cancer. So once again, this marker wouldn't have been helpful. Now, we intervened with the way that she was metabolizing. We found that she had some genetic SNPs. Her catechol-methyltransferase genes were horribly altered. Her MTHFR, her methylation pathways, were altered. Even her acetylation pathways, these are detox pathways, were altered genetically. They didn't have good function. And so we did things to optimize her estrogen metabolism. And I know we have a short time tonight. We'll go into this in great detail during the module. But look what we did to the estrogen. The 4-hydroxyestradiol decreased. It was high, 2.27. It decreased. The methylation increased. We're not out of the woods. We have more work to do. But we're seeing a definite shift in her estrogen metabolites and a movement toward much more safety, that she's not going to stimulate more adducts on her DNA. Here's her progesterone. We see that it was low. I'm not going to spend too much time here. We'll talk about pregnanes and pregnines during the module. But we see that it was low, and we probably need to augment her progesterone. And we suspected that when she said that she had problems around her cycles. Here's her genetics. She had 2 MTHFR SNPs, so her methylation capacity is decreased. Look at her COMT. 6 out of 6 alleles are abnormal. Her ability to make catechol-methyltransferase is truly compromised, and her acetylation pathway was slow. So it's toxic burden, not BRCA genes, that led to Jessica's problem, and who knows how much of her lifestyle played a role in this. So here's how we treated her. We gave her methylated folic acid. We used a product called Methylguard because it has trimethylglycine in it, but it also has 1,000 micrograms of methylated folic acid, so it takes care of the MTHFR, but it also addresses her COMT. Gave her trimethylglycine to help promote COMT activity as much as we can. Selenimethiodine. Iodine is very breast protective, and again, there's a much bigger conversation we need to have about iodine. We used diindolylmethane, and then we cleaned up her gut with curcumin and probiotic. These were the modalities we used to move her urine metabolites as much as we have, and then we'll engage some other activities as well. Again, we'll get into some more discussion at the conference. So simple math on cancer. You take one cell, you make 2, you make 4, you make 8, it multiplies. But cancer cells double every 25 to 1,000 days. Big swing, right? 25 to 1,000. Well, it's based on how you're treating them. 30 doublings will lead to 1 billion cells, and now you can see it on a mammography. All right? Maybe you can see it earlier on a thermography, but a mammography takes at least 1 billion cells, or about a centimeter in size, and it takes 2 to 100 years before it's detected. Now, the speed of replication is controlled by lifestyle and diet. So we can slow that down so that she stays with that breast cancer her whole life, but it just never gets detected. For a study by Barnard, where they took breast cancer cells and they exposed them to the blood of women, and they documented the growth rate of the breast cancer cells. And then they had those women go home, and for 2 weeks they ate a high fiber, high vegetable diet. And here's what they showed, that after 2 weeks, They took the very same blood from these same women and simply sprinkled it on breast cancer cell lines in petri dishes. And they documented a reduction in the growth rates. These are 3 different forms of breast cancer, and all of them had a reduced growth rate. Here's what's more impressive. The apoptosis rate increased dramatically. So simply the content of phytonutrients, of diindolylmethane, indole-3-carbinol, antioxidants that is found in the blood of women eating a high vegetable diet was enough to stimulate apoptosis in breast cancer cells. Huge, and there's studies to show that. All the toxins that we experience in our life, our stress and the chemicals and so forth, is driving toxicity, driving our increased risk for breast cancer. And we have to understand that we all have breast cancers, or cancer cells living in us right now. Are we feeding them or killing them? Well, here's all the different things in our diet and our lifestyle that either promote or reduce the breast cancer's ability to grow, our support of the immune system. This is where we have a chance to intervene. There's an article on my website you might find helpful. Share it with your patients. Use it as much as you like. Copy it, put your name on it. I don't care. I just want women to have this information. There are at least 20 different daily decision points that they're making. This article can help them take better control of their lifestyle. So these are the things we're going to be talking about at Module 1. I apparently lied. I said I didn't have much to go over. This is just the female stuff. I do have some slides here on guys, but we're 30 minutes in, and I don't want to run late, and I do want to give you a chance to ask questions. So I'm going to hold the guys in reserve unless you beat it out of me, and I'm going to open up the phone to any questions that you have. Happy to take any questions at this time. And if I hear crickets, I'll just keep going into the men's hormones.
Thank you so much, Dr. Huber. So if anyone does have a question, please use the chat option. Okay. Well, Dr. Huber, did you want to spend a couple of moments on the guys while a couple of questions come in, or you lead the way?
No problem. I'll go through a couple of these. You know, I want to dispel this myth, just like in women's hormones. I want to dispel this myth that we are brought up with, that estrogen causes breast cancer, and the myth that testosterone is bad for the heart and the prostate. Nothing could be further from the truth. That you have no evidence to back that argument up, and there's plenty of evidence to show that testosterone is hugely valuable for blood sugar control, metabolic syndrome, cholesterol, cardiovascular health, cognitive health, on down the line. This is a lovely article that I think we've all seen, but I'm going to go through it briefly. This is a Vigan study that came out in JAMA in 2013, and this is interesting. They followed 8,700 men with the testosterone below 300, which I think we would all agree is low, after they had coronary angiograms, and they just documented what their outcomes were. Did they go on to have a heart attack? Did they have a stroke? Did they die? Well, 1,200 of those men received some testosterone therapy. There was not a dedicated regimen. They just happened to receive testosterone therapy from their doctors, so there's a variety of regimens used here. Here's what they found. For the 7,400 men that got no testosterone, the rate of heart attacks was 5.6%, but in the men that received testosterone, it was only 1.9%, less than half. CVA, strokes, 6.5% with no testosterone. For men receiving testosterone, only 2.7, again, less than half. And death, 9.1 versus 5.5. I'll let you pick which group do you want to be in. Yet despite these unbelievable numbers, this was the conclusion by the authors. Testosterone therapy was associated with an increased risk of adverse outcomes. This has drawn an outcry from many doctors to have this study removed or altered, because it's just, the numbers don't meet the results. But unfortunately, this is common. This is reflective of many of the studies we have seen in the literature. They're absolute garbage. We have other studies that show that non-diabetic men were 4-fold more likely to develop metabolic syndrome if they were hypogonadal. Lowest quartile of testosterone was twice as likely to develop metabolic syndrome or diabetes. There are multiple studies talking about metabolic syndrome and diabetes, and cardiovascular health with very good numbers, and I want to dispel those myths in Module 1, so we'll go through that. We'll also look at some of the ways that we measure testosterone and what's a reliable way, and then secondary hypogonadism, because that's a primary form of low testosterone states that we will run into. They're not typically primary. Other lectures that'll be there, Pam Smith, huge, the hormone queen as she is known. We'll be talking on many different topics, including thyroid, and then Sahar Swadan. If you've never heard Sahar, great insight on compounding. Dr. Trindade is going to talk about insulin resistance, and Lena Edwards, you don't want to miss talking about adrenal health. So all these topics coming together to give you a good sense of endocrine function. Jennifer Landis is going to talk about estrogen dominance. I'm not certain what Joel has on tap. But that's the conference coming up. I hope to see you there, and I hope you have at least one good question for me tonight. If I have not stimulated any conversation, then I have failed you.
Yes, we do have some questions for you, Dr. Huber. This is going back to the case of Jessica. What was the dose of methyl tetrahydrofolate that you used?
Let's see, go back to Jessica. Not that this slide's going to tell me, but it's going to rattle my brain. Oh, the methylated folic acid. MethylGuard that I use has 1,000 micrograms per capsule, and I use typically one. I find that one for women, men or women that have a single SNP tends to do a good job. I further backed up the trimethylglycine component with 2 capsules of trimethylglycine, 600 milligrams each. The methylated folic acid, the MethylGuard, is a full B complex, but it has 1,000 micrograms of methylated folic acid.
Great. Dr. Huber, which tests do you use for epigenetic testing?
For epigenetic testing, you're going to have to be more specific on that. Epigenetics is a huge field. Are you talking about just genetic testing? I'll go with that.
I'm not able to tell, but let's go with that.
Okay, so probably genetic testing. Well, you know what? I got a little frustrated with a lot of the genetic testing out there because it's hugely expensive. If I just want to get a BRCA gene, it's $1,600. If I just want to get an MTHFR, if I just want to get an ApoE, these kits are often $300 to $600 each. So we developed our own algorithm on our office. We do our own detective work. We get a 23andMe panel, and we get the molecular codes, and then we search the document for the molecular codes and get our own COMT testing, acetylation, caffeine metabolism. We look at 25 to 30 breast cancer genes, probably 10 prostate cancer genes. We look at vitamin A metabolism, vitamin D metabolism, but we do it all in office. If anybody's interested in pursuing something like that, I'd be happy to help you with it. We offer that to our patients for just $475. Okay, it's a lot cheaper than the thousands that they would pay otherwise going to get all these different detox labs. So that's what we're currently doing in our office.
Okay, we do have a question on testosterone. Dr. Huber, is there a preferred testosterone supplement for bodybuilders that promote lean muscle growth with the least amount of health risks?
Bodybuilders. Well, you know, bodybuilders are no different than the rest of us. Their occupation or their hobby, depending on what level of function they are, their need for testosterone is not greater than ours. And so testosterone is testosterone. We use bioidentical testosterone, and what I do, and I do work with some bodybuilders, but again, you have to recognize that historically in the world of bodybuilding, they have abused anabolic steroids, and they've used multiple anabolic steroids. And when they've used testosterone, they've abused that as well. When I say abuse, I mean they take it to abnormally high levels. My practice is based in health, and I'm not of the mindset of using these things as tools to promote muscle growth at risk of creating other problems. I know there's all kinds of different manipulations you can do to guard against the estrogen. The biggest problem as you begin to overuse testosterone, its conversion to estrogen, its impact on the prostate. I don't think that's a winning game. So is the question, how do I juice a guy to help him win a bodybuilding contest without hurting him? I look at the free fraction of testosterone, and I use the equation. Again, I give it in the conference. I don't have it on the tip of my tongue right here, but I use an algorithm that I plug in the sex hormone binding globulin, the albumin, and the testosterone, and I try to keep my free testosterone in the 150, maybe as high as 180 range. That's the free, or I should say the bioavailable testosterone. I've been checking testosterone on men for years. I have maybe 2 guys in my practice that walk in and their natural testosterone is in the 900s. That's 2 out of hundreds. So it is just not normal to take a man's testosterone above 1,000. You can do it artificially. It's not normal and it's not healthy.
Thank you. I think that's going to wrap up the questions, but if anyone does have another question, certainly feel free to email it and we will address it. Dr. Huber, I want to thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. For anyone who would like to participate in Module 1, you can do it online, but if you would like to join your future colleagues May 19th through the 21st in beautiful Hollywood, Florida, you can meet the faculty. They are a dynamic, thoughtful group. You'll meet new colleagues, expand your therapeutic toolbox, and have all of your toughest endocrinology questions answered. For those on the webinar this evening, we do have a special discounted rate where you will save $250 off of the module. And Dr. Huber, do you have any final thoughts for this evening?
No, other than the hotel down there in Hollywood where the conference is absolutely delightful. It's a great destination.
Fantastic. Well, if anyone would like more information, I'm certainly available. My direct line is 561-777-6807. My name is Lindsay, and I'd be more than happy to support you, cheer you on, and get you started on Module 1. Again, thank you so much for your time, Dr. Huber, and everyone who has attended this evening. Everyone have a fantastic evening.
Good night.
Good night.